Michael Line, the Kabbalah and the Tarot, presented by Paul Weston. A visionary journey along the St. Michael line, exploring divination, the green stone and sacred sites, inspired by the psychic questing movement. Recorded live at Megalithomania Conference 2006.
Welcome to my lecture then, thanks for coming. This is the Michael line, the Kabbalah and the Tarot. Now, I'm not here to engage in any archaeological considerations. This is an unashamed visionary Glastonbury journey that we're going to be entering into here. My attitude to all of this is to simply take the Michael line concept, the Michael ley line, as a psychogeographical, geomythic reality, and to feel that, okay, if you play games with that, stuff happens. Now, I'm going to paraphrase ever so slightly the words of Aleister Crowley to sum up my attitude here. In this lecture, it's spoken of the Sephiroth and the paths of spheres, planes, and many other things which may or may not exist. It's immaterial whether they exist or not. By doing certain things, certain results follow. Be most earnestly warned against attributing objective reality or philosophic validity to any of them. The whole thing really kicks off with John Michel's book, The View Over Atlantis, that came out in 1969. In this book, he noted a relationship between this site, the ruined church of St. Michael, or at Boroughbridge, generally known as Boroughmump, not all that far away from here. You can see that it bears a fairly obvious visual relationship to Glastonbury Tor, and the two seem to be aligned together in some way, facing the same sort of direction. Both churches dedicated to St. Michael. In a kind of visionary moment, John began to extend the line a little bit further and to realise that if you go down in the direction of Cornwall, there are a number of distinctive sites with churches dedicated to the Archangel Michael. This is Brentor, and you can go all the way down to, go back there, to St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall. Now, this is a place where there was a major vision of the Archangel himself. All kinds of stuff went on there, healings were attributed to him, and so on. So we have to kind of say, well, who is this dude, the Archangel Michael? He's certainly the kick-ass angel of the Book of Revelations. When it all starts to get towards the end days, he has a tussle with the dragon, Satan, gives him a bit of a pasting. The churches dedicated to Michael are usually built over old pagan sites. And it's interesting that during the Middle Ages, his feast day, or one of his feast days, I should say, was May the 8th. Now, this man, Rudolf Steiner, one of the 20th century's great visionaries, believed, as do some mystically inclined Christians, that we've entered into, since the end of the 19th century, a kind of epoch of the Archangel Michael, which is part of the run-in to the whole conflagration of the end days, etc. The thing that's interesting about Steiner, although he's generally known as an esoteric Christian, is that he felt that the Archangel Michael was a form of the Babylonian god Bel-Marduk, and that doesn't really tend to endear him to fundamentalist Christians. Steiner's ideas are quite widespread, and they've influenced people like Glastonbury's visionary Wolsey Tudor Pole, and also the man known as the grandfather of the New Age movement, George Trevelyan. Michael, that's not George Trevelyan, by the way, believe me. Michael's also been linked with Apollo, and most interestingly, from the point of view of British landscape mysteries, back to King Arthur Place, with the Pendragon King, Arthur. And in fact, people like Trevelyan will kind of see a chain of command from Christ down through the Archangel Michael to Arthur. And that kind of brings us to the idea of what Pendragon is supposed to mean, the name attributed to Arthur. If you extend the Michael line in the other direction, we've been west down to Cornwall. If you start moving it east, you find that it goes through these extraordinary places like our greatest megalithic temple, Avebury. And that's been conceived of as something that's got a very strong serpentine element to its design. This is the famous work of Stokely. He was around at a time before a lot of the stones got demolished and generally vandalised. And he drew the whole thing with avenues that are not totally intact now, and you can see how near it is to Silbury Hill. There's this idea that maybe there's something that you could call a Pendragon force in the ground, terrestrial Kundalini. All these ideas were moved to another level of the game in 1989 with the publication of this classic Earth Mysteries text, The Sun and the Serpent, which is an account of a journey along the Michael line by researcher Paul Broadhurst and dowser Hamish Miller. And in a few journeys along the whole length of the line, Miller came to believe that the energies are a kind of polarity that manifests in the form of a caduceus, one part of which could be considered very broadly and generally to be male and one to be female. And there's some kind of alchemy of energies that works its way all the way along the line in this manner. The whole thing, that's only a fraction of the major sites that are upon it, but you can see the broad relationship of the tour of Avebury, of the sites down to Cornwall, and the fact that it goes all the way along up to Norfolk, to Bury St Edmunds and beyond. And according to The Sun and the Serpent, the whole thing is aligned broadly to what you could call the Beltane sunrise period, which is pretty much right now, this period of time. It has been speculated that these sites lie along an earthquake fault line. Two of the major buildings along it, Glastonbury Tor and some of the buildings on St Michael's Mount, were both destroyed by the same earthquake. I think in the 13th century. That's quite rare. But that's as far as my general kind of intro and overview of that subject is concerned. I just take all of this kind of thing as read, as I said. In July 1990, I was very much involved in psychic questing, and in particular this saga of the Seventh Sword, Andrew Collins' great cult book. A group of us at the time were basically living a life where we were willing to act on insights, inspirations, visions, dreams, portents, all this kind of thing. Go off and visit sacred sites at the slightest excuse and see what developed as a result of it. With that kind of general mindset, I came down to Glastonbury in July 1990 with one of the psychic questing group at the time, a guy called Alex Langstone, just for a bit of R&R, nothing overly mystical about it. And on the long journey from Essex down to Somerset, we just started burbling away and talking like you do. And we got onto the subject of the Michael line. And we started talking somehow about, you get these things like the Lombard RAC car rally where you get these mud-spattered cars careering along the road at a hectic pace. One guy's navigating, they're going along. It's all very intense, a lot of fun. And we thought, well, why not have a Michael line rally? Why not try and cover the whole length of the Michael line over the Maybank holiday? Go down to Cornwall, start off on Saturday morning and see if we could do the whole thing by the end of the Monday. We realised that if we could do this would be, magic for the 20th century. We knew that the Knights Templars would never have been able to do this at 90 miles an hour listening to Osric Tentacles. So it was obviously a kind of new form of urban shamanism that we'd be experimenting with. And the idea would be we wouldn't just be sightseeing. Every single place that we visited, we'd do something, some kind of visualisation, meditation, simple ritualistic activity of some kind. So at that point, the idea of the Michael Line Rally was born, and we talked about it to the other members of the group at the time, and they were up for it, and we scheduled it for the spring of 1991. Now, when the spring came round, I realised that I needed a theme for all this. And I looked at what is very much a period piece, Earth Mysteries, classic of the 1970s, Quicksilver Heritage by Paul Screeton. Now, a lot of these books, to our way of thinking now, might seem a little bit naive and out of date, but I've got a real affinity for these books, and I really like them, and I think that even now in the present day, there's a lot of inspiration that we can get from the ideas at that time. Screeton talked for a few pages about landscape Kabbalah. Now, the Kabbalah, the major mystical system of the Western mystery tradition, supposedly a map of how human consciousness and the universe hangs together. If there's any truth in that, then there ought to be something that you could get from it that will tell you a little bit about the Earth mysteries and the landscape and so on. In all of these pages, he only really gives one tangible example of what that would mean. And that's our old mate, the Carnappus giant. Now, this image, an ithyphallic, if people haven't got Latin, that means sporting a big stonking stiffy. Ithyphallic figure, male figure, corresponds to the magical image that is associated with one of the spheres of the Tree of Life that's called Yesod. Now, that was as far as that exposition went, but that's the earliest mention in print that I can find anywhere of the concept of landscape Kabbalah. But for me, the whole thing was significantly vibed up by my knowledge of this. The Green Stone saga, as initially written up by Graham Phillips and Martin Keatman, and then expounded quite a lot of it in a lot more detail in Andy's The Seventh Sword, is really where the whole phenomenon of psychic questing started. And in my opinion, the Green Stone Seventh Sword saga was the greatest paranormal drama to be played out in this country in the 20th century, an absolute embarrassment of paranormal riches. The basic story in a nutshell is that the usual sequence of visions, dreams and strange experiences led a group of people in the late 70s to believe that there actually physically existed a green talismanic jewel embodying tremendous magical power that had been passed down through a list of the usual suspects, the Rosicrucians, the Knights Templars and so on, back to the time of the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten. And that this thing still existed out there and could be retrieved in the British landscape. And in an amazing sequence of events, it actually was. A whole series of psychic visions and general intuitions created a kind of history for this thing. And the idea was that there had been contact between the court of Akhenaten and a few refugees, if you like, for the megalithic culture of Britain. We're talking about a period of time that is kind of on the cusp of the Neolithic and the Bronze Age. The era of places like Avebury and the building of has already passed. We're into the sort of classic time of Stonehenge and that sort of thing. And with that, the whole vexed question of whether there is any contact between this culture and the Egyptians. Now, anyone that's interested in that, it's not a particularly good scan. That's Kingdom of the Art by Lorraine Evans, which is a Graham Phillips-inspired book that is based on an investigation of the persistent medieval legends that Scotland, believe it or not, was founded by a woman, a princess called Scota, who was actually a daughter of an Egyptian pharaoh. And Evans believes, inspired by Graham Phillips, that this was for real and that this woman was actually a daughter of Akhenaten. In the midst of all of this, you've got the idea that there was a meeting of esoteric technology, that a group of people came from this country to Egypt, and Graham had a vision of this green talismanic jewel in the actual headdress of the Pharaoh Akhenaten. And then a bunch of guys, small bunch of people, no more than maybe about a dozen people, leave Egypt when everything goes badly wrong for Akhenaten, and they come back to where the technology for this stone originated, which is Britain. And the idea was, with the stone physically retrieved in 1981, that Andy Collins and Graham Phillips went for a journey inspired by a sequence of visions which would be retracing the steps of these Egyptian refugees, and they'd left this kind of stored up magical power in some of these different places. And sure enough, were led along all of this, and it later turned out that the sequence of sites that they visited, Graham initially referred to it as the Beltane line, but it was realised that all of these sites were on the Michael line, and that they seemed to resonate with the Kabbalistic tree of life. Now, the way I'm going to explain this, some of you may know the Kabbalah, that's great. You may well get some interesting ideas as a result of this. If you don't know the Kabbalah, most of these different spheres, I should say, have got planetary attributions. So if I kind of mention some of these, that will help some of these ideas to resonate. It's not that important if you don't really get a full grasp of this as I'm going through this. The source of the whole thing, which for people who know the Kabbalah is Kethar, is the Merry Maiden Stone Circle, which, although at that time was not in any way connected with the Michael line, was later in the Odyssey of Broadhurst and Miller doused as being connected to it in some way. Dosmery Pool and the Hurler's Stone Circle, and also Roche Rock, we're all in an area which we can call Saturnian, which is the Kabbalistic sphere of Binah. Some of the more obvious one, the Tor, the solar Tiferet, the sun, that's a pretty obvious one. And then that's a bit of a fanciful vision of Avery and Silbriel, but you get the general idea that they're all kind of part of one zone. This is Venus. And then the White Horse of Uppington, Wayland Smithy, that's Mercury, which is Hod. So there's this kind of idea that there are sites on the Michael line that align in some kind of coherent manner with the Kabbalistic tree of life. I'd got that in my head already from my association with Andy. None of this is actually written down in any of the books like The Green Stone or The Seventh Sword. This is William Blake's famous image of the giant Albion, the personification of our island realm. Now, when John Michel first came up with the idea of the Michael line, he painted a mural on the wall of a cafe in Glastonbury, which was his version of the giant Albion stretched out along the Michael line so that the Michael line could be conceived of as a kind of spinal column of the giant Albion. Now, there's a village up in, I think, Suffolk called Eye, and that kind of made a difference as to what end this image was pointing up to. So the head was up in Suffolk and like the feet are down in Cornwall, and that's become a generally accepted part of the mythology. It's mentioned again in The Sun and the Serpent. Now, I'm not necessarily dissing that. I'm just now going to present a different angle on some ideas there, which also, in my experience, proved to be quite fruitful. Now, we know that Blake was into the Kabbalah. The guy read a lot more than maybe some people might imagine. And in the Kabbalah, we've got an idea of this cosmic human, hermaphroditic in form, called Adam Kadmon. And you can see where there's Hebrew letters above the head and the shoulders and so on. This is where you would map out the Kabbalistic tree of life on the body of Adam Kadmon. And it's kind of like the subtle anatomy that we've become quite familiar to in the yogic chakra system. You know, this kind of imagery has become very widespread through New Age culture. So I thought to myself, okay, I know about Albion as a possible Adam Kadmon. I've got this idea of the Kabbalah and so on in the Michael line. It's a case of kind of how to go about using it in the landscape. So you can see there that I've got an image of Blake's Albion, and we've got the spheres of the middle pillar of the Tree of Life, the Kabbalah, Kethar at the top, moving down through Tifreth and down to Malkuth, marked out on the body. And anyone who knows the Western mystery tradition of the 20th century will know that it's considered that between the spheres of the Kabbalah, there are pathways that are mapped out by the tarot trumps, the major arcana. You know, this is kind of fairly well established. There are some slight contention over what cards go where, but most of the major systems, like the Golden Dawn, the attributions that Dion Fortune used, she accepted the Golden Dawn attributions. Crowley, broadly the same, with just one card swap over that's based on a passage in the Book of the Law, which some of you might know. I realised that there was room for creative magic by using another one of Graham Phillips' very interesting ideas, because as well as landscape Kabbalah along the Michael line, Graham also talked about landscape tarot. So what do I mean by that, to give a quick introduction to that idea? Here we've got an icon of Joseph of Arimathea, Glastonbury's most famous mythological visitor, with his famous staff, which he placed in the ground and which flowered. And you can see the white image of the Ace of Wands. Where did Joseph of Arimathea famously do this? Wirral Hill, the Holy Thorn, you know, one of the last surviving living medieval relics, I guess. I mean, this version of it only went up in 1950 from an original cutting. But that could be conceived of as an Ace of Wands site. So that gives you a kind of little idea of how that sort of thing works. So, okay, I'd taken that on board. I was going to use that idea. I was going to take the ball and run with it. How was I going to do this with the middle pillar of the Michael line? Because I just wanted to emphasise the major sites there. The High Priestess card is the one that links together the crown in Tifreth, the crown in Kethar, the Merry Maidens, down to Tifreth, Glastonbury. So where in Glastonbury could you do a visionary visualisation path working with a High Priestess card? Well, here we got Glastonbury Abbey, one-time major shrine of Our Lady of Glastonbury. And down in the ruins is what's now known as the Mary Chapel. So when we went off on this journey at the beginning of May 1991, we ended up gathering ourselves down there, and where those flowers are on the altar, there used to be a cross, sat around in front of it and visualised the scene as it actually was in reality, and then saw the cross begin to glow blue and expand into an egg of light that just filled up the entire area. And then, inspired by one of the greatest of all the images of the High Priestess card, Crowley's version, a great veil was kind of drawn between two pillars of the temple at either side, and a figure appeared behind it who was Virgin Mary / Isis, Queen of Heaven. And that's very effective. Now, I happen to have seen, when I was getting the ideas for this together, the Mythic Tarot. And what interested me there, it's not necessarily a deck that's loaded up with Kabbalistic magical associations at all, but I really noted that image of the steps leading into that doorway into the landscape there. So I incorporated that into it and saw behind the High Priestess figure, down in the Mary Chapel, a doorway into the landscape through which you could see the Merry Maidens. And that sort of starts to give you an idea of how that kind of thing would work in the landscape. Now, in the midst of all of this, all kinds of fun and games started to happen to me once I set it in motion. I had a dream that I was flying over the White Horse of Uffington, and somewhere a little beyond that, looking down, I could see this area, big fields, few trees, and what looked like some kind of mounds of some kind, and I just knew that's Seven Barrows. And when I woke up, I thought, well, what the hell was all that about? And I asked Alex Langstone about it. I said, is there a place called Seven Barrows, not all that far away from the White Horse of Uffington? And he said, well, yeah, it is. Not only that, there is, some kind of significance for our journey there. This is another one of those classic 1970s texts that archaeologists and historians just pull their hair out with it. It's a visionary journey in which another great ley line is postulated across the English landscape. And that is, you can see it running north to south. It's known as the Magnus line. From the point of view of any of the normal systems of verification that people tend to employ, it's a complete nonsense. But we'd already had a few episodes in Psychic Question up in Cumbria at the end of 1990 that had led us to believe that there was something about it that was important. What was really strange about this was that Seven Barrows is, as near as makes no difference, at the joining point of the Michael line and the Magnus line. And Seven Barrows is not mentioned in The Sun and the Serpent, and it is not mentioned in Brigantia, and I have never heard of it. So why on earth was I, when I thought the Magnus line was in certain respects nonsense anyway, having a dream like that? Clearly we were going to visit it, which we did, wandered about the barrows, dung a few Tibetan bowls on top of them like you do, and ultimately did the obvious, which was to visualise an enormous great cross of light extending across the landscape from where we were, up and down the Magnus line and along the Michael line. The next port of call from the point of view of the Kabbalistic tarot attributions was near Dorchester-on-Thames. And this is a place, on the horizon you can see a place called Whitnham Clumps. There's the River Thames, and the buildings are one of the locks, Day's Lock, on the Thames. That's Whitnham Clumps, used by the Romans, used in the Iron Age as a hill fort. It's been featured on Time Team. Interesting kind of place. What I was looking at was the link between Tifereth, Glastonbury, and Yesod, Dorchester. And that's going to be the Temperance card. This is the classic traditional version of it, the Wake card. Now, what you got here is the place where the Michael line and the Thames cross. So that's very interesting in itself. And I looked at the Mythic Tarot deck, and I saw this figure, Iris the Rainbow Goddess. And I remembered that in the Kabbalah, there's like a veil that crosses between Yesod on the way up to Tifereth. It's called Paraketh. It's normally portrayed with a rainbow. So, to give you a real sense of how this journey went, it is my great pleasure to premiere today a work by Glastonbury artist Yuri Leach, specially commissioned for this event. This is the Angel of Temperance. You can see with 1 foot on the land, the Michael line, 1 foot in the water of the River Thames. See Whitnham Clumps in the background. On either side, to the left, the White Horse of Uffington, Mercury Hod. To the right is Silbury Hill as part of the Silbury Hill, Avebury, Venus Netzar complex. Above that is the Tor, the Solar Tifereth. Now, picture the scene if you can. By this stage of the day, we've come to Dorchester. It's twilight. It's an evening in early May. First stars maybe come out and been reflected on the water. We're sitting by the side of the river in a circle around a lantern with a little candle in it, and we imagine that light in that lantern getting bigger until it becomes a great egg of light that encompasses us all. And then through that we see, as if in wonderful sunshine, our own version of this image. And between the chalices, the gold and silver chalice, the energies of the Michael line and the Thames go in eternal harmony and equilibrium and equipoise. The way the image came together was so striking and had such a level of harmony and perfection about it that I really realised more than ever before how these, wild adventures of Andy and Graham years before, 10 years prior to that, with the idea of the Michael line Kabbalah, still had a tremendous amount of scope to expand on a magical, mystical level. And if nothing else, actually doing that path working there just felt absolutely and utterly fantastic, and that is really the bottom line. The world card links together Yesod and Malkuth. We were going to do this thing in Bury St Edmunds, in the ruins of the abbey there. And the visualisation I came up with was an image of the giant Albion standing, between two parts of the old ruins that had once been an arch, presumably. Archangel Michael and Virgin Mary on either side of him, sun rising behind his head. As it rises behind his head, it turns into a crown. They both put their hands on it and they crown him. While we were doing this, other stranger things were also going on, which were a measure of the whole idea of psychic questing as it worked in those days. One of the people that was with us, Debbie Benstead, was the functioning psychic of the group at that time. She was a major visionary who was able to bring about physical manifestations of things at the same time. While we were doing this visualisation, she saw going on around us some strange ceremony with these guys in robes, and she said that they were Masons or something like that. And it was all connected with Edward VII. And Edward VII was actually there, and it was some kind of the king and the land are one Masonic ceremony, something about pumping all that kind of stuff up. And while she was looking at this visionary scene, it was as if one of the figures in it tangibly registered it, looked at her, holding something in his hand, threw it at her, and it hits her in the side of the head, and she feels like she's got this piece of metal in her head. Now, that all seems pretty strange, as indeed it is, but we recognise that as one of the signs that possibly there was some kind of physical artefact out there that we were going to connect up with as a way of anchoring the full manifestation of what we've been doing. We later find out that Edward VII was actually, at one point, the top Mason in the whole country. He was very, very strong in all this. And in fact, he did visit Bury St Edmunds. We can certainly say that much. So we leave there on our way to the final part of our journey. It's not a very good shot, but it gives you a general idea. That's the ruined church of St Margaret's at Hopton-on-Sea, gutted by a fire in the 19th century. Never really rebuilt. It's the place where the Caduceus energies join, according to Broadhurst and Miller, for the last time before they kind of disappear off into the sea. Now, in the middle of it all, you can see the general state of ruination, how overgrown it is. You might just about be able to make out that there is a cross standing there to signify that it's still considered to be hallowed ground. We did a little visualisation, and Debbie started to say, look, this thing that's been thrown into my head is here. It's actually physically here in this place right now, and we can find it. And she started to kind of use a sort of hand dowsing, really, just wandering about, getting a general sense of what's what. That's not a very good picture, but go back from that, go back from that. Not a very good picture, but round about where the foot of that big tree was, she settled upon a particular area and said, look, it's in there. And there was a lot of bits of brick and rubble and bramble and plants and stuff. The ground had not been disturbed there for a long time. Now, early on in the journey, as far back as Cornwall, and at periodic times through it, especially when we passed through Glastonbury, she kept coming up with images of the lion and the unicorn. And that the lion and the unicorn were not just about the coat of arms of England and Scotland being joined together, but there was magical alchemical reality in them, and that there was something in that imagery that also spoke about what was going on in the landscape of the Michael line. Start scrabbling away in the ground at the bottom of the tree, get down to the level where the earth is, something becomes visible through the earth. It's uncovered, and it's not a very clear image, but it's pretty obvious that's the lion and the unicorn. What we later discovered that was, apparently, is a Royal Fusiliers cap badge. You can tell from, if you look at it, and I have actually got it with me, and if you ask me nicely, I might be willing to let you have a peek. It's clearly very old. You can tell from the lead paint on it. It may well date to a period about as far back as the First World War. It's been there for a long time. What it was doing there and how we came to find it in those circumstances is a complete and utter total mystery to me to this day. But it proved to be the climax to what was a journey through layers of English history. You know, from the time of the megaliths through to the early Middle Ages, through to the occultism of the 19th century. All of this stuff resonates as, I said, a psychogeographical geomythic reality along the Michael line if you're willing to approach it in a certain manner. If you are willing to approach it in a certain manner, a most excellent adventure awaits you. And that's another bit of artwork from Yuri Leach that he did at the time to commemorate that journey, showing the theme of the Lion and the Unicorn, Michael's Mount, and the ruined church at Hopton. Did the Michael line a couple of times in the early 90s and then moved to Glastonbury. And when it came to 1997 and I knew that the general election was coming up on May Day and there was a fair chance there'd be a change of government, I started thinking maybe it's time to do it again. Now, at that time, I was working in a dark satanic mill in Glastonbury, performing robot repetitive tasks that did not need the full engagement of my attention and energy. So while that was happening, I was imagining myself a couple of 100 feet tall, directly sort of standing through the roof of the building that I was in, with all the spheres of the Kabbalah, you know, majorly alight all down my body of light, and reciting all these Hebrew mantras that are appropriate to the different Sephiroth, and then imagining that gigantic archangels that were miles high were coming at me from the four quarters, and that a huge download of cosmic light was coming down through my head. That is the only way to keep sane in IMCO Plastics, if anybody has ever worked in there. While all that was going on, I came into a massive download where basically I got detailed tarot imagery for every single one of the 22 trumps, in as much detail as, say, the Temperance card, which linked in all of the history, all of the Kabbalistic attributions and so on. And we set off on a pretty damn fine journey down the Michael line in 97. And when I got back, I discovered this had manifested on the day that we set off on our journey. Now, don't get me wrong here, it wouldn't be the biggest surprise in my life if I discovered that human agency was responsible for this thing. But I think it stretches the meaning of the word hoax to breaking point. There are many people familiar with the crop circle phenomenon who have had preposterous synchronicities and episodes with these things that even when they're considered to be, man-made formations, they seem absolutely perfectly set up as if for your very benefit, and they are giving an affirmation to you. And I think you could probably forgive me for thinking that, after a decade or so of these crop formations appearing big time, there was a lot of time for a Kabbalah to be put on the landscape. It just happened to appear as we were going out and doing these extraordinary detailed visualisation path workings using the Kabbalah along a whole load of major sacred sites. So I kind of see that as, go back to the last slide there. I kind of see that as part of the, can we go back to the final slide, somebody? I kind of see that as just a general orientation around the final slide as opposed to the first slide. Yeah, I kind of see that as a general orientation at the time of, the arising of the Eon of the Divine Child and the general spiralling around that we're doing as we align to galactic centre. This kind of stuff becomes more and more possible. And it's something that we've all got the option of interacting with. We don't have to play by any strict rules necessarily. We can use other people's inspiration. We don't necessarily have to stick to it. There's poetry, there's creativity, there's magic in these processes. And in that, we do form a connection to the landscape and to the way in which that landscape has shaped people's consciousness through the ages. So I commend to you the virtues of a journey along the Michael line, and it's one that I certainly hope I'm going to be making on many other occasions in the future. So thanks for coming and listening, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
This has been a Megalithomania audio production. For more information, visit megalithomania.co.uk.